I liked that one about the witchcraft. Remember that whole comment about good witches versus bad witches?
You'll have to refresh
Will
my
you say
memory on
more?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We were talking and they were saying that this whole thing goes down to good women um fighting against like the inherent motherhood, not
Mm,
necessarily, giving birth, but just having that nurturing spirit versus
mm-hmm.
those that are anti the nurturing spirit.
mm,
And
Mm-hmm.
that's where this whole thing comes down to. That's basically a really bad paraphrase of what they were talking about. But I remember
Mm.
them, I was like, oh, we should all dress as witches. I'm not dressed as a witch, but I do have a,
Oh my gosh, look at
this is my
that.
pointer for class this,
it's your
this
skeleton
week.
hand.
So
I
I'm like,
love that.
you can't talk unless you're holding this
Mm.
in my classroom.
Right.
Hi,
That's great.
hi, Helena. Hello, the Clue channel. It is October 16th, and we're streaming live on YouTube. This is your sanity check for the month or whatever this is. We do this about once a month, sometimes twice a month. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I'm joined by Cari Bartholomew and Christine Stephen-Wolk, and it's lovely to be here with you all. So the
Yes.
conversation about good witches, bad witches, or good women, bad women, I kind of have a different perspective on that. I think that it's so easy to be in the good or bad position just depending on a slight twist of your perspective. And was just I was just having this conversation with some of the girls in my mom's group, my play group. We have a homeschool group, really tight knit, loving group of people that we've been spending a lot of time with for the past 4.5 years. So these are good friends. Our kids are good friends. We are good friends. And sometimes you'll find intergroup conflict. I guess
Mm-hmm.
is that intra-group conflict with the kids.
Intra. Yeah.
Yeah, intra. So the kids will have conflicts, and we have personality disagreements, and things will come up, and it offers us an opportunity to work through difficult social situations with our kids, to both model how we work through those difficult situations as adults, and also to help guide our kids through the more difficult parts. Like, one of the things that I really like about our group is that we don't supervise too heavily. So there's a lot of relatively unsupervised play. We sit and talk, and we let the kids go figure their own thing out. So they get to figure out their own group dynamics in a way that in a public school setting they wouldn't be able to, because they'd always be watched like a hawk. And so it offers them more freedom to learn. But
Mm-hmm.
also, if something does come up, and it does sometimes, that needs somebody else's attention, needs an adult to intervene, the people intervening are people who genuinely have an investment in the kids, not just a, financial stake or a supervisory role, but really a loving investment in the kids and in the parents of the other child as well, and the other family as well. So it's really great. But even with that, sometimes the conflicts are really intense and can lead to a lot of hurt feelings. And you can see people sort of wall off and become kind of, or there's the I guess it doesn't actually, it hasn't happened. I have to give these women a lot of credit. They've really put themselves out there with each other and when these things happen. But there's that temptation to wall off and avoid, or go into a defensive position. And I think that that's so much more common. It's like good and bad is so relative, often relative to your own
Yeah.
position and perspective. I don't know what you
Yeah,
think
it
about that.
is.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is relevant. Well, I think good and bad are also very black and white words. And so I think it's hard too, because you can be a good person who's done some bad things. You could be a good person who's, you can also be a bad person who's done some good things, maybe for your own benefit. So it's bad and good, I think, are hard to attach to somebody's character. It seems like it's too broad and too sweeping to do that. So, but it's interesting because at this time in the world, thinking about where we are politically in the world, I do feel that there are evil and positive, like evil and good kind of influences spiritually that are sort of happening here, no matter what side of the aisle people are on. And so it's like cringeworthy for me to even say that. And I would have cringed saying something like that even 2 years ago. But I do have that sense now. But I think the way that I think about it is a lot kind of, it's a lot broader in some ways. And maybe it is black and white thinking too. I don't really know, but I do feel like, we're kind of at this place where we're, as kind of a society and humanity, we are trying to make decisions that are going to sway us one direction or a totally different direction, at least in this country, for sure. And that's frightening to me in a lot of ways, because I feel that on a spiritual level. I think if it was something that was more surface, that was just about good and bad, good versus evil, and that there wasn't a spiritual component, I probably wouldn't have such strong feelings toward that, because I just believe that that's just a deeper place, whether it's your unconscious mind or whether it's your spiritual beliefs. Those can be so much more powerful than even looking at, what reality says or rationalizing. Those can have a much different, greater impact, than just that. So, and I feel like good and bad, it just sort of limits us in the way that we think, and it limits us in our belief systems, I guess, in general. I don't know. I might have just walked myself into a circle, somehow not knowing where I'm going to end with this, but yes. So I guess, in some ways I kind of see that perspective. In other ways, though, I am thinking more about things on a spiritual level, which I think is a bigger, um, it's a much broader understanding. And I think it's also scarier because the implications can be more severe.
So I can see it from that spiritual level, but I also see it hands-on in the classroom right now. I have students who are half-time in a homeschool situation and half-time in a charter school situation. And when you are abusing the children, and you are, and that's the issue of who decides what investment means. If the investment is, and this is their language, not mine. I'm going to quote from Queering of the American Child here. Okay. So if the investment in that is to intentionally traumatize kids, to break them, to cause that cognitive dissonance, then you're abusing children. And I feel like that is so cut and dry. That even lets me remove my religious feelings about this and just be cut and dry. I am watching kids struggle and literally, because I do Socratic seminars in my classroom, raise their hand and say, I don't understand, because at home I'm taught not to lie, that lying is wrong, that lying is bad, it's morally, not okay. And then at school, I have to look at somebody who was Mr. Smith last week and call him Mrs. Sunshine this week. And I know it's a lie, and I have to do it for 8 hours. And they're not saying for 8 hours. I added that part, but they're saying, I know it's a lie and I have to do it. And they're really struggling. And you're watching their mental health just fall. And so at that point, I think there is a very clear, and then I sent you guys that post today about the person saying that you believe this way, you're an uncaring person. And I don't think that that's true about either side. We both care. We all care desperately. The question, though, is what do we care about? Do we care about quote unquote better things? Who knows if it's better? How do we measure whether or not it's better to care about our safety and our country and our sovereignty, or to open it up and let America become basically a gas station, a way station where you take what you want and you keep going? I guess a convenience store, but who decides? And I think that the deciding factor comes down to what you guys studied to be. Do no harm. If you're literally harming people, I'm not harming a person by saying, I don't want to pay for illegal immigration to have the benefits that I personally can't afford. I'm not harming them by saying, you don't get to take that from me. They're harming me. This is my country. I'm sorry, but it is.
Well, the people that are harming you aren't those immigrants. It's the people that are allowing them through the doors.
Right.
Well,
That's
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 what we have to, that's what we have to face, is the
that's
people that are
yeah.
opening the door for them and
I
printing the
think
money.
this raises a question that I think it might sound kind of simplistic, but how do we, we see the words like good person, bad person. Oh, she's a terrible person. Oh, he's evil. These kinds of things. They're thrown around a
They're
lot. I mean,
toxic, right?
we talk about them like with the political figures. We talk about them with like Bill Gates or Jeffrey Epstein or
Yes.
these kinds of figures. We can say this is a terrible person. But then you also just see it all over the place on the hate fest that is Twitter, that where it's just somebody there's some clip of 20 seconds of someone's life of them behaving in some kind of bad way, or some little screenshot of something that someone said, like, do you remember this one was really all over the place about a week or so ago, where a guy said, he posted, I know why new fathers cheat, because my wife has ignored me for 8 weeks and I'm, kind of whatever. And it was a really crappy post. It was really, really insensitive. And as a person who's had a mother who's had 4 kids and who did have a partner who cheated on me during that period, um, it's really reprehensible, the thing that he's talking about. But the level of hate that got levied at this person for one slice of his life, like, we don't know if he saves puppies in his day job. We're just going to say he's a terrible person for this.
Hmm.
And so I'm interested in, like, philosophically, what does somebody have to do to be a terrible person? And I'll also ask this. I'll also preface it with this. So on Monday's live stream, we spoke with Jennifer Law, and she's done a lot of wonderful work around medical ethics. She's got amazing documentaries that are free on YouTube. If you go to her channel, it's the Center for Bioethics and Culture. She puts her documentaries up free, and they are amazing. She just wants them to get a wide audience. She's not trying to make money off of them. She's got one called Big Fertility that's about the fertility industry and surrogacy. Anonymous Father's Day is fantastic. It's about uh,
Hmm.
donor conceived children. She's got many. She's got some on the transgender issue. So I totally recommend those. But her video, Big Fertility, it features a woman who was a surrogate 3 times. And she had terrible experiences with this. And they're really, her testimony is really valuable because it gives a window into what this experience is like for the woman who becomes a surrogate and for the babies that are produced via surrogacy. And one of the things that Jennifer said was she was kind of surprised when they tested this video in front of audiences, how little sympathy people had for this woman, even though she has a really horrible, heartbreaking backstory herself and reasons why she was really vulnerable to the lure of financial payoff.
Hmm.
And I said, I don't have an awful lot of sympathy for her either, for the decision to become a surrogate, because she knew she knew going into that first one that it was iffy, and she knew going into the second and certainly the third that it was iffy. However, I'm not here to judge that woman. I'm not looking at her through the lens of, is she the victim or is she a bad person? But some people would say that she was just a terrible person for doing this. And so I'm kind of wondering, what does it mean to be a bad person? What does it mean to be a good person? Do you have thoughts on that? It's such a complicated and yet simple question.
Well, yeah, because I think on the surface, it's why I think intention has a lot to do with this. It's your intentionality, what you intend to accomplish by doing X, Y, and Z. You're blowing off steam and you say something about, my wife hasn't paid attention to me for 8 weeks, so I see why men cheat or something like that. That, okay, you know what? I might be able to see that perspective. I get it. For this one moment in time, this is what this person thought. I wouldn't have called him a bad person. I would have probably said he's uh an unfaith, isn't faithful to women, or isn't going to be faithful, and he's a cheater. Are all cheaters bad people? I don't know about that. I think it's what your intention is. If it's very self-serving, then I think that's something to consider, where you might be a little bit narcissistic, or maybe you're a little bit, selfish, just to put put it very simply. But if your intention, you know, is to help somebody else, or it's to help yourself get out of a situation so you can stand on your own 2 feet, or if it's because you're trying to, this is what you truly believe is the right thing to do, then I think that is more of a way to gauge what's good and bad. It's the intention behind the action. I guess that's what I would say. I don't know though, because it's hard for me to look at some of the things you're talking about, Cari, that are happening in the classroom with those students. It's hard for me to not think that these teachers that are promoting some of this stuff are not bad people. I have to stop myself and say, are they just misguided? Is this just coming from the powers that be that are controlling, you know,
Right.
the curriculum? And is it really them, or do they really believe what they're doing is good and positive? Or do they really want to hurt and damage kids? You know,
Mhm.
and I think, or, you know, we were talking about this when, before we started recording, on the political spectrum side, you know, are you a bad person because this is who you want to vote for? Or are we typically good people that can be found on both sides of the political spectrum, but have different personal motivation for why they want to select who they want to select to run the country, whether or not we think it's positive, ill-informed, you know, maybe, you know, my husband always says it's low information voting, that kind of stuff, not really understanding what you're voting for. So I think in general, intention, but I don't think that intention is easy to see or understand unless somebody literally sits there and says, well, this was my intention behind why I made that comment or why I did what I did. Um, anyway, I'm going to leave it to you, Cari, to jump in.
Yeah, I think that at the risk of really blowing up comments, I think that there's a reason that Judeo-Christianity works. It gives us very clear code in what is good and what is bad. It tells us to seek out truth. It says, don't just blindly follow. I know there's a lot of people who think that as a Christian that you blindly follow, but it literally says, do not just blindly follow, but to seek out truth. And when we seek out truth and we see kids that are happy and healthy, and we start to see them broken. And again, and I know I've said this before, but instead of thinking of people as bad, we need to see them as broken. If they can't listen to another point of view, if they can't even be in the room, they walk out and they're just like, I've had people who have been like, oh, I've had enough. I've
Mm-hmm.
had enough. But I at least try. I start off with, okay, you're saying this, maybe you're saying a whole bunch of things about me. I get called toxic and mean and all the, all the time. And I'm like, why are you saying that? Because I can give you a whole list of things that I do that are not toxic or mean. But this is what you see because it's what you've been taught to see. So, like my students asked me the other day, what is woke? And I said, I think woke at its, and one person raised their hand and it said, it's knowing about the injustices of the world and knowing what you should do about them. And I said, is it knowing though? Is it actually knowing? Or is it being told and not questioning?
Mhm.
Because over and over again, you're told not to question. Now, that was a problem before, but when the problem becomes we now are justified to hate everyone who's not like us, literally to hate them, to write them off as you are this, thus you are this, and not even give them the time of day, then I think that that gets to be evil. And almost going full circle to the witchy thing. There's a lot of people who will talk about, I was listening to a woman, I don't know if I believe her in everything that she said, but I was listening to her on a podcast and she was saying how she got caught up in witchcraft. But as she continued to talk about witchcraft, she was talking about the same stuff that's in SEL programming. And so it was very interesting to go back into that and to realize that a lot of these people aren't bad. I've heard many people say, well, the first time I went, I didn't feel comfortable with this. But as I went more and more and more, I got more comfortable. So you got brainwashed.
Mm-hmm.
And then um, and then and that's bad. I would say that's bad. But what becomes evil is when you then become part of the blob that must attack and must destroy the people who are standing up for right. And but at the same time, It's evil and it's broken. You no longer have the courage. You no longer have the will to stand up for what's good or what's right. And for me, I do blanket statement. If you will not protect a child, I think that that is evil because they are vulnerable and we have a responsibility as adults to protect children. Now, there are people who will say, well, the way I protect a child is let them, as I affirm
Mm-hmm.
them. But
Absolutely.
the science has not proven that that's a good idea. The science, we have a man who's going to court on Friday. He's a doctor and he made false cards. If that's as far as I'm going to go online, but he made false cards for people. And now the federal government is trying to send him to prison for 10 years. Okay. But he was trying to protect. And now we know that what he was protecting from, there was real reason for doing that protection. The
Absolutely.
evidence is there. Just like the
Absolutely.
evidence is there that our kids are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. The evidence is there that we are more divided, that we hate. There are people who are saying we are going to face a civil war. And when I see people who just automatically say you are nothing because you think this way, I think they're not far off. And that's
That and
evil.
his intent, then that doctor's intent. So on the surface, that looks like, oh my God, he broke the law, he did something bad. But that doctor's intention was to save lives. His intention was very good, in my opinion. And it came from a spiritual place that was probably, in my opinion, that he had a moral, like responsibility to his profession to do no harm and to protect. And he went
Maybe to
about
save
it
lives, maybe just to allow people to make
exactly.
decisions for their own bodies.
Exactly. And so
Because we didn't know back then whether or not what was going to happen. We had our suspicions, but my point is
Mhm.
once it's
I think
proven and we still fall for it,
this is an example of why the legal code is a really blunt instrument and a poor method for regulating medical ethics, which should be strong and regulated within their societies. I mean, you've got a medical, this is the guy who violated an ethical standard of his association by falsifying a medical
mhm,
document, right?
yep,
So that's
yep.
that if he is expelled from that association based on that, or some kind of censure is called for based on his violation of that ethical code, then that really implicates that system for having rigid and
Mhm.
irrational codes that don't allow for someone to use their own judgment when it comes to something like that. But the involvement of the law in that just codifies that particular ethical uh, uh, professional associations ethical code into our legal code, and means that he's going to face legal consequences for that. And so the law is a really blunt instrument, I think, for medical
well,
ethics.
and I think that that's the question we need to be asking as we move into November. How much more of this is going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are being taught.
Probably a lot more. On the
Well,
other side, probably a lot less.
yeah, I
Dr.
mean,
K. Zilla, do we need competing medical professional associations? I think so. I
Mhm.
think we do. And I think we need more competing psychological associations as well, because when you see something become
Absolutely.
institutional and become an
exactly.
institutional monopoly, it starts to think like an institution instead of like what it started as. I think there's a huge problem with scale and groupthink.
Yeah.
I
And
think this is what,
yeah.
and I'm just going to plug critical therapy antidote for a
Mhm.
second. That's one of their goals, is to become an association that is another parallel association that has a
Yeah,
different code.
that's great.
Yeah.
But
I want to go back to something Carrie said about Christianity and the idea of good and evil. And I think this is one of the areas where Christians have it so right, is in the acknowledgement that good and evil is in all of us. By acknowledging that every person is a sinner, you recognize that the people that are giving into their temptation are not that different from you. They are just making a different choice. And so that choice is with you every single day and everything that you do. And your, like you said, Christine, intention matters. It's your free will that leads you to choose what you believe to be right or what you believe to be wrong, not what you believe to be pragmatic or beneficial to you in that situation, but actually right and wrong. And I think that there's such a the people who sit in judgment of other people, like the guy who said the horribly crass thing about cheating on his wife. I mean, that was a terrible statement. It was absolutely horrible. And if that's what he believes, then he's got a problematic belief, and that's not okay the way he's treating his wife. But to sit in judgment of someone based on 2 paragraphs that you've seen that they've written, I mean, who among us hasn't done something that you could sum up in 2 paragraphs that would make you look like a terrible person? Like
Oh yeah,
who among us? I certainly have. I mean, you
Right.
probably could write a book about me that makes me look terrible.
same,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think
same.
though that there was any chance, because this is another one that I have when I watch religious people say, "Oh, we don't do that because of this," right? And I just go, is there no such thing as redemption? Are some
Mhm.
people not capable of redemption? Because if that's your version of Christianity,
I
it's not
think
mine.
I think
Like,
that everybody's capable of redemption, but I don't think that just being sorry
right,
and repenting and going forward differently necessarily absolves you of the consequences of your previous behavior.
true. That's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, if you have if you have been sexually promiscuous and you have a disease
Yeah,
and you
that's
change your
not
whole
going
life
away.
around, it doesn't matter. You have to live with
That's
that
right. And if
condition.
you've killed someone,
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
or if you've hurt
If we
hurt
don't let someone out
someone,
of prison. Yeah,
right. I mean, maybe
right,
you can be redeemed as in relationship with humanity, in relationship with God, and in relationship with your choices as you go forward into the future that you have in front of you, but it
right.
doesn't absolve you of consequences.
Well, it's crazy to me because, okay, I'm going to jump to the political range here, but it's crazy to me that people think that Donald Trump is beyond redemption for having affairs and et cetera, when Kamala got into office on her knees. So the hypocrisy
Well,
there
but has
blows my
Donald
mind.
Trump, and I'm just going to ask this, what when you talk about redemption, that would
Yeah.
indicate that he has
Yes, he
had some
has.
sort of repentance. Has he talked
He
about that?
has.
Okay.
He actually has. He actually has said, there are people who think I'm God. I'm not God. There's someone much more important than me. And he literally, I mean, he's in a church and he's in so, and I think that if if people have tried to kill you 3 times, you might have your quote unquote come to Jesus moment.
Well, and I'm not trying to dog on Trump or
No,
promote him
fine.
either direction, but I am going to ask if people are holding him accountable for his past statements and behavior, has he said anything to directly express remorse for those past behaviors and statements? Because I could see people not wanting to let him off the hook if all they see is him just continuing to act and
Yeah.
not saying that, because that goes a long way, saying I am accountable for my behavior. This is what I did and it was wrong.
Well, so here's things that he didn't do that he's supposedly supposed to say he's accountable for, right? Like he supposedly has said, um, they're very fine people on both
Oh
sides.
yeah,
And we know that's not
the
true,
whole
right?
quote is not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like they don't have the whole quote there. There's a ton of things that they have presented. The same thing with being accused of sexually assaulting a woman whose cat's name is Vagina and says she fantasizes about rape on a regular basis and tells The View, I'm going to take you all shopping when I win this case. You know, there's not arguable proof he wasn't allowed to even stand there. And so when religious people say, I can't vote for this because of that, meanwhile, there's a whole history of this other person, of Ms. Harris.
Mhm.
There's this whole history of her that they won't touch. And more importantly than that, is the Marxist roots of it. Because if you're a Christian, you can't be a Marxist, period. I don't care who that offends. Marx literally said, I can't wait until I can march around the world as God. That is not a Christian perspective. And so if you are embracing that, then you're utterly hypocritical, and you don't really believe in the redemption arc, which is what Marx doesn't believe in. Go ahead. Sorry.
I know, and I'm just going to say this, she'll probably blow up the comments too, and that's fine. I don't particularly need somebody who has a strong moral character to be president of this country. I need somebody who wants this country taken care of at all costs. I want somebody who wants to make sure the citizens are put first. I want somebody who wants to make us energy independent again. I want somebody who wants to bring jobs back to the United States. I don't give two craps if that person has slept with 1,500 women. I don't care if that person, I don't know about, I mean, there's certain things I wouldn't want, like, you rape a woman, that's just fully different.
Right.
We're talking about something else, but I'm talking about the behaviors that some could find morally questionable, or they don't really align with kind of your beliefs, but there's nothing inherently, reprehensible that is, that you can't forgive. It's not like harming somebody intentionally. So if I put all that to the side, and then I have a candidate who was a party goer and who did a whole bunch of drugs even, and is clean and sober now and thinking properly. What I care about is what that person's going to do for me and my family living in the United States. So I don't look at the moral character. Every president we've ever had has cheated on their spouse or has had mistresses. This goes on both sides. Maybe not every single one, but a majority of the popular ones, the ones that we adored and who we taught in history class were some of the best presidents we had ever seen. We know that our forefathers had slaves, at least some of them did. And I highly respect our forefathers in the Constitution, and I think it's been shredded to pieces. So that's clearly something that I'm not saying one way or another it should be highlighted or not highlighted. But I'm talking about what I want for my personal leader of my country. That's why I don't care about the name calling that much. That's why I don't care when people say, well, that person's just a misogynistic pig. I don't have to live with him. I don't have to raise kids with him. I don't even have to like him. I don't have to have him be a part of my family or a part of my home. But I do need that person to be able to speak on behalf of the safety for my family and the safety of this country. Even if it's narcissistic in an attitude, fine. Do it because you think you're the best thing on the earth since sliced bread. Go ahead. I don't care why you do it, actually, because that's not somebody that I'm going to be in a personal relationship with. And I would never be in a personal relationship with somebody like Donald Trump. I wouldn't. Would I vote for him for his policies? Yes, I would. But do I think that that's necessarily that he was perfect in any of the? No, because I was a vehement hater of Donald Trump. I mean, you couldn't find somebody who hated him more. I had to start educating myself a little bit. And then I had to stop and think, Christine, what do you want in a president and in a leader? And that's where, for me, the moral questioning of his actions, I don't care all that much. And that might sound horrible, but I just don't, because it's not the same playing field as somebody who's in my life. And I do think he's much better for the children. I was just listening to a podcast this morning about, he did a town hall today or the other day, and it said, well, what about women playing or men playing women's sports? And he just said, well, I'm just going to say to stop. Like, it was this very simple, we're just going to end it. Like, we're not going to have 50,000 arguments about it and back and forth and dig deep and all that. We're just going to stop it because it's not right. And that's kind of what I want to see.
Well, what's also not right that really upsets me is, like, yesterday there was a new plan for Black men, and part of that marijuana. Yay. Like, why do you think the lowest things, you're going to legalize marijuana when you kept people in prison for smoking marijuana? Like,
that's what Harris did. She's known for that.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. So why do we keep the most base things, the most the most dehumanizing things, the most disrespectful things. Not that smoking pot is all of that, but when you're saying that you're this moral bastion who's going to bring excellence into this world, then why in the world are you going to the most base, reductive things that keep a person, quite frankly, in their
Well,
place?
yeah, it's terrible for you. It saps your motivation. It screws people up mentally, and it's just horrible. It's
But it's
horrible. Yeah.
so racist. It's
Yeah, it
so
is
insulting.
racist.
And then, and I do want to tie it back to the whole thing of that it's the issue is that you're the people who are saying that you're the good ones when it's like, arguably, this is not good.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, I'm glad you're making that point because it comes back to this. This is something that I recently I saw this breakdown of groupthink. One of the signs of groupthink is thinking that your side is good and the other side is evil. And so I have to check myself when I start to do that as well. I have to look and am I doing that? Am I starting to see that? And I refuse to give any of these politicians the weight of good or evil. They're just people. They're pragmatists. They
That's
are
right.
they are trying to they're following the form of politician. And I don't care. We had George W. Bush in office. Do you remember that guy?
Yes, of course.
You remember this guy?
Yes.
I have books of this guy's dumbass
Yes.
sayings.
Yes.
This was when, to me, it became obvious that the person standing up in front of you is not, he's just the figurehead. He's just the lightning rod, or she is just the lightning rod. Really, that person is a mascot. They're
Right.
not that meaningful in terms of policy. You've got to look and see what the policies are. And so right
Right.
now, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I used to be a Democrat.
Me too.
All I
And
can
I'm
say is that
I'm
I
also
cannot
neither.
vote for the party of medical authoritarianism. And I can't
No.
vote for the party that's in favor of gender ideology and that's
No.
promoting identity politics. And so if that party starts to
No.
get sensible again and the other party starts to look less good to me, I'll be voting for that party again. I'm not aligning with good or bad. I'm just seeing these forms that follow the forms of politics. And people
Mm,
get really fired up about good people, bad people. Like Kamala's a
mm-hmm.
good person and Trump is the
Mm,
devil. He's really Hitler. Or Trump is great. He's going to be the one to save us. And Kamala is she slept her way to the top and she's a floozy and she's an idiot and she's a drunk or whatever it is that we want to yell at each other about. But at the end of the day, don't pick based on the mascot, pick based
No,
on the
I'm picking based on the
policies.
fact
That's
that,
the point. That's my exact point.
yeah,
Without, I mean, you said it more eloquently than I did by far, but that's my basic point is I'm not looking at those particular things, the mascot situation. I want to, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? What can be accomplished? And are you promising what you're promising? Is that even accomplishable? Is that something we can even achieve? And so those are the things that have become a lot more important to me as I've gotten older and stopped being a Democrat. And I have to say, it's only when I stopped being a Democrat that I became more open minded to that idea that I don't have to agree morally with the person, who is representing in order for me to in order for them to earn my vote. That was the Democrat Party for me, in my experience as Christine Stephen Wolf, okay, was a cult that brainwashed the hell out of me, that taught me I was not a good person if I didn't vote for their side every single time, that taught me that I was not a good person if I, at all wanted to look at what the other side had to say. And I believe a classical liberal, a classical liberal. That's what I see myself as now. However, I'm registered as a non-party preference voter. I'm not registered as a Democrat anymore. And I'm not a Republican either. And so there's this kind of middle, I'm a policy voter now, I would call myself. However, at the end of the day, the party that made me feel the worst about myself and that continues to do that if I get riled up a little bit or I talk to my very liberal friends, it's the Democrats. those are the ones who've made me feel like absolute crap. And I went into a helping profession where I didn't really make very much money for most of my career because I chose to work directly with people that were in acute mental illness and had acute, failures of mental, sanity. And, and I chose that because it's what I wanted to do to give back. And that was something that was for me. So to be sat and told then that I'm not a good person if I don't vote a particular way is absolutely disgusting. And to be honest with you, I still have people that are in my life that are close to me who feel that way. And, they don't even watch the podcasts I do. I purposely keep these things separate because I don't want good relationships to be impacted by stupid crap like that. And
Well,
that's what happens.
Christine, I would go further and I would say it's not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's our political system, it's our political structure that's so messed up because
Sure.
just right now the Democrats are representing a lot of things that I think are really reprehensible, and they can't, as much as voting means something, I can't vote for them. But when I was 25 in 2000, when 9/11 happened, I was I 25? Was that what year was that? 2001?
Think you would have
One.
been,
Yeah, so I was 25.
yeah.
I remember the Republicans doing a bunch of really horrible and inane things that were obviously lies right in front of us in order to get us into a war.
Right.
And,
Sure.
you saw Dick Cheney and Donald
Sure.
Rumsfeld puppeting this guy out and,
Yes.
this whole
Yeah.
drum up. And that's when I started thinking that left and right meant something, that Democrat and Republican meant something. And at that time, there was no way. I joined a team. I'm not a team joiner anymore. I won't do it ever again. The Democrats right now represent something worse than the Republicans represent to me. So again, in as much as my vote means anything, I won't be voting for the Democrats. But that doesn't mean that I somehow now equivalate or make an
Exactly.
equivalation with the Democrats being good or bad and the Republicans being good. It's just not.
Yes.
It's not that simple.
I am a conservative. I am the state director of a conservative organization, and I'm still not going to vote down ticket because there's a ton of people who lie about what they stand for, or what they stand for is what they've always stood for, and the conservative movement is different than that.
Yes.
But more than that, you guys, for me, again, being in the classroom, looking at the kids, one side is going to force us to turn children into bigots.
Yes.
It's up to you on what side that is, because when I said to my students, we cannot, because I'm watching them say these people and these people are not allowed in our community, and they're children.
I would just counter that the other side has that same narrative.
Well, that's what I was
going
going
the
to
other way.
say is that afterwards, after I had this conversation and I said, we cannot do this, you guys. And I was as welcoming to my classroom as possible. And I said, none of you are in trouble. I understand how you're feeling, but that is different when we start to say that this group and this group are not invited. If we start to say that, then it becomes a slippery slope. And I said, so then what? Then it's not Mexicans and not Black people? Is that what we're going to do here? And I just said an ideology is different than people. And I did have a parent who was very upset and thought that I was a woke teacher. So it comes on both sides.
Interesting.
Wow.
So one side is going to force us to turn children into bigots. The other side is going to be that pivot. So either way, if we don't stand solid in what we know to be true, which unfortunately is a wrestle between both sides.
Yeah,
but one side says they'll get rid of DEI.
I don't think people on the left realize how deep this institutional stuff goes, the DEI training and the teaching. So I think most people, if you told them they're doing this, they'd think you were exaggerating. I don't think that people think this is good. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I want to read a couple of the chats. Spinster Mountain
Oh,
says,
great.
Spencer Mountain says, I'm having a hard time deprogramming myself from my left-wing training to hate the other side. Yes, Christine, I was just thinking the same today. So hard not to hate coming from the left. And Vivienne B says, is this a new idea? Vote for the party that offers policies that suit your values best at this time. Anyone who relies on the party for their mental health is just weird. I think that's a great perspective. And right now we're so polarized that people need that kind of reality check. Vivian, thank you.
Yes.
And then Kathleen says, coming off a weekend with a family of hardline Democrats who are not open to any perspective other than Trump is Hitler. This conversation is a balm for the soul. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad I hear that. I have that in my family too. And I just
Same.
I avoid, like Christine, I have to sidestep it because I think that connection should come before communication. And if we're trying to communicate and we are not connected, then we're just going to fight. And for family, I don't need to fight with them about politics. I can just talk to them about a pretty shell on the beach or about
Exactly.
somebody's trip to Alaska, or, you know, we'll talk about other things. We have better things to talk about than arguing about politics.
Yes.
Mine's funny because it is a conservative family and they still don't believe. They very much think you're exaggerating. There's no way. And you're just like, I know you want to save I mean, they don't know that they want to save their kids. But if they understood what was happening, they would be like, you know, but they don't get it. So it's what it is.
And it's interesting because, you know, if you look at Middle Eastern people who are from the Middle East that come here and start businesses and whatever, a vast majority of them are registered Republican voters. That's the side. They're actually not. So it's interesting when you hear a narrative about what immigrants want. But if you actually sit down with an immigrant family who has like a first generation, you know, child here, which I would be first generation, you would find that they typically have these ideas of work hard, get ahead, and keep the government out of your business. That's pretty much the three things that mattered in my family. So my family, 99% was Republican and has been. I was an outlier, and I have another family member who has always been an independent, always looked at both sides of the aisle. She never fully supported one or the other. But anyway, so it's interesting to me because this idea that the Democrats are pro-immigrant and they know what the immigrants want, that's not actually true. I was just in not Northern California, Central California. It is considered the Bible Belt of the West, okay? And it was Trump country. I mean, Trump, Vance, recall Gavin Newsom, everything you can imagine, all over the place, okay? And it's like 60% Hispanic who live there, and they're farmers. So a majority of these people do not speak English that well. A majority of these people don't have the education, formalized education that we have. And a majority of those people are Republican, and even further than that. And Trump too, I don't know. Some people say he's not a real Republican anyhow. He's whatever he is. But they're all in support of all of that. And those voters are very disenfranchised in a lot of ways because they're always pretty much, there's an assumption that if you came here as an immigrant, you actually want, you know, you want socialized medicine, you want socialized programs in general to be at the forefront of where most of the money is spent. That's not how these people think. And that's what makes me, you know, very you know, hot under the collar, if you will, when people start talking immigration and what immigrants want. Unless you come from an immigrant family or you've been to areas where a lot of immigration has taken place. I'm not talking about Mexicans and Latinos that were born here and have been here for several generations behind or in the urban cities. I'm talking about where they make your food, where they produce clothing, where they produce food, where they actually produce items, right? They make their money off of items, not ideas. And it's a very different group, a very different way of thinking than this. Anyway.
I
Wow,
wonder,
ladies, we really went there today.
I wonder if like a palate cleanser might be a conversation about men for Kamala.
Oh
Do it.
my
I'm good with it.
gosh.
I don't have the
Yes.
video, but I also
Oh,
don't want to, I don't want to hurt you all with the video. It's so cringe. If they haven't seen, who has seen it? Have you both seen it? The ad? And then,
I
you haven't
oh
haven't.
seen the
gosh.
ad? Ooh,
So,
No.
Cari, can you describe the ad for anybody who hasn't seen it? And
sure.
Christine?
Yeah.
Please, yes.
So this is, I believe it's called Man Up. And
Is it? I mean, I'll look. I'm gonna look again. Maybe I can find it.
yeah. So I watched it from the body language guy. I think he's hilarious because he makes commentary. But this is supposedly, I'm a man. I do this. I'm a man. I'm a man. But these are the most I can understand why the leftist woman says, I don't need no man. If this is what they envision men as being. I mean, one guy sits like he's on a parade float as the princess on the parade float. And he's just like, I offer my full throated endorsement. And you're like, okay. And it's just every one of them are the worst version of men. And so this whole idea, like they've really belittled men, and then they wonder why men aren't voting for her because you have taken a really long time to say that the patriarchy and that men are toxic. And then you're showing a video where you can only find that kind of, weak, really weak men. The kind of men that you're like, ugh, I do have that. I do have that visceral reaction sometimes when I'm in a room with men who I'm like, you are so weak. I'll tell you a little side. We have a mouse infestation right now. I have a ton of chickens and we have a mouse infestation. And I had COVID for the last 2 weeks. And I couldn't even scream when the mouse ran across my bathroom. But I
Oh
called my
no.
husband and he was like, I'll be right there, and he's been doing the mouse thing. He's been dealing with it. And I'm like, wow, he has become
shared the
so
wrong thing.
sexy after 20 years because he's killing mice and he's doing what men do so I can play my role of, oh my goodness, it's a mouse.
Oh.
There it is.
Yes.
Okay.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing the ad right
Yes,
now?
you can
Okay,
see it.
that's what I was going to
Yes.
show you.
And
So
yeah,
the super cringe. I'll show it
Yeah.
real quick since
yeah.
Yes.
people, if it's only a minute, so you guys can maybe hold your luncheon for a minute.
You think I'm
Yes.
afraid to rebuild a carburetor? I eat carburetors for breakfast.
I'll tell you another thing I sure as shit am not afraid of. Women. Woman wants to be president?
Well, I hope she has the guts to look me right in the eye and accept my full-throated endorsement.
Because I'm man enough to support women.
All right, so that's it. I couldn't find it. Oops.
Yeah, there's a ton more to it, but
I couldn't find the whole ad, so I had to find you guys somebody talking about the ad. But that gives you a sense of what it was. It's just
Yes.
And
Yes.
and
just-
apparently they were like most of them were they're all actors, and
actors.
most of them are gay. And they
probably,
aren't the
I
guy
mean,
who
what are
my
you gonna find
God.
if you
the guy
you
who
can't
does the
use
carburetor, he's not a mechanic, and he's like, I eat carburetors for it's not even legitimate. Yeah,
No. And then they say things
Oh
like,
my God.
I'm man enough to let women read Little Women. And I'm just like, be honest about what that book really is, because the new Little Women is different than what we know as Little Women. They are, but they're
well, and the
they're
guy who says he braids his
sound
daughter's
bites.
hair doesn't have a daughter.
Daughter, yeah,
No,
no.
no.
I mean, he says
Oh,
something about
gosh.
he likes his donuts, and you're like, is that code for something? Because I think it might be code for something.
Oh my gosh.
But it's harsh.
Cringe.
Like they've
Oh, yeah.
created this world. They've created this world where men can't be seen as men. And so that commercial, guys see that and they're like, what the heck? That's what you think of us? I'm not voting for that.
Right, it's a stereotype. It's bizarre. It's really
It's
bizarre.
But I thought
Very
stereotypes
bizarre.
were rooted in truth. This should be
Yeah, generally. They're rooted in some kind of truth. It's just when you use them as a blanket to describe every single person with those demographics, then it becomes,
Well, and remember,
problematic,
this is
but
the party who
they are
can't
bred
define
from
men.
some truth.
But this
They can't define women either.
right. So this is the party who can't define gender, and it shows in that commercial.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, the one who's like, my horse tells me, whatever. I'm like, dude, you look like so many guys out here that are literally saying, we we are peacemakers, or we are peacekeepers. We don't say anything. And they will get up in church and say, you know, we just want you to be more tolerant and inclusive. We don't have time for politics. And I'm like, you liars, you
Yes.
just said what your politics are.
Yes.
They're using it to turn people into this. And I'm sorry, but if that's what my son has to look forward to, I will crawl over glass to not vote for that,
Yes.
because that is not healthy for our boys. Our boys should be just as proud of being boys as we are as of being female. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with who they were created to be. They need their purpose, and this strips them of it. So there's my palate cleanser.
And we need each other. This whole like, I don't need a man, or I don't need a whatever, a woman. I mean, we do need each other. Humans need humans. I mean, we're social beings, and we
Yeah.
tend to want to partner up. That tends to be a very, emotionally and psychologically healthy way to move through life with companionship. I mean, it's the I don't need a man movement was, I think, very prevalent when I was in high school. And
Yeah. Do you remember I remember having a button that said, I need a man like a fish needs a bicycle. You remember that?
yes,
Wow.
yes, yes,
You guys, I was
that was
waiting for
very
Prince Charming.
prevalent.
So
Well, I was too. I just thought it was funny, but
Yeah.
I was boy
Waiting for
crazy
Prince Charming.
from early on.
Yeah, but I hid it. I hid that because it wasn't okay. See, that's the thing, is I've
right.
tended to be a lot more that way. As an adult, I'm a lot more open, I mean, opinionated, but I hid that because I didn't want to be kicked out of the group. And the women that
Mm.
were saying this all had boyfriends. That's the thing that used to drive me up a wall. I'm like, okay, well then dump your boyfriend. It was very hypocritical, but I started to notice a lot of these hypocrisies along the way. It took me until I was an adult. And actually it took me until I went back into the field of psychology, to be honest with you, because I used to work at Comedy Central and MTV for several years before I made a career change. And I worked at Comedy Central when The Man Show was a big success. And it's called The Man Show. So you can expect to just use your imagination what the show was about. Adam Carolla was on that show. And you know, uh, it was very much your typical kind of typical guy kind of a thing. And I used to be a publicist, so I was part of helping to promote that show. It wasn't until I ended up changing into mental health that I think all of that, I started to kind of do another 180 again to the other side of things, and in a lot of ways lost respect, I think, for men, and lost respect for just women that felt it was so important to have a partner or to have companionship. And I think that is what the mental health industry had already been captured by that point. And so I think that's where that comes from. So even though, I walked away from teaching, I was not that way when I first started teaching. That took some time.
The getting men and women to hate each other and to not trust each other is maybe one of the most foundational attacks on the family and on individual sovereignty. It's so outrageous. And we have a culture that plays up these really kind of reductive and stereotypical aspects of masculinity and femininity without realizing we are fundamentally different from each other, but we're also more like each other than we are different. We have so much in common with each other and so much need for that, for the complementary ways that we're different. And I wrote this essay a couple, I guess I wrote it when I was traveling. I was traveling 2 weeks ago, and then I posted it a couple of days on my Substack. Then I called it, I hope my kids won't be gay. And I talked about kind of my perspective on how we went from learning to accept people as being different as a culture, being able to say some people are love men, and some women love women, and that should be okay. You can tolerate and allow that and give them space and let them be human beings in the world just like everybody else. But we went from that to promoting homosexual and transsexual lifestyles to everyone. And one thing I have to wonder is, there are some people who are just, we know, just it would be really abhorrent to them to think about being straight because they're just cut from this cloth that, as from people's reports, this is what we have. But now, and we have to believe people. I believe that there are some people who just so fundamentally are attracted to the same sex that that's just how they are. But there are also a lot of people now that we're reducing stigma and promoting these things that are claiming a bisexual, polyamorous, we're going to do that as stigma drops, more and more people are trying out these kinds of alternative sexual lifestyles. It's reducing family cohesion, it's reducing fertility and childbirth, and it's increasing the
Yes.
demand for artificial
Yes.
contraception and childbirth technologies and surrogacy. And I think that there is, I don't know about you guys, but when I went through a horrible, horrible breakup, I can remember saying, I'm just going to be a lesbian now
Yeah.
because it's too hard to deal with men. And I thought, I'm not repulsed by women and I don't have any disgust for homosexuality, and it'll just be a lot easier for me to live with a woman. So if I can just, this was like something that really went through my
Yes.
mind, like maybe I'll just date women. I could do that. I'm not grossed out by that thought. I could totally live that lifestyle. And how many people feel like as we're stereotyping men and women and just showing the worst of men and women, how many young people feel like, well, it'll be easier to be like among like. It'll be easier for me if I just choose this.
Yes.
People that understand me. So I know that's a really hot topic and I'm dropping it right at the end of the hour, but maybe if you guys want to talk about it at length sometime we could, and if you have any thoughts right now,
I think that's
I'd love to
great.
hear about it.
My only thought right now is that we're reducing men to slinkies, and I don't want to sleep with a slinky.
A slinky?
So, a slinky, those toys that are like bendable and
Slinky?
flimsy.
Well, how is a
Sadie.
man a slinky? I
Because
want
they
to know.
flop all over the place. Well, that's terrible. That's not what I mean. But I mean,
Cari.
but they're just, there's no substance.
Yeah.
They just kind of, and
Yes.
that's what they're reducing them to, is this thing that's no
Yes.
substance. Sometimes they're considered an ATM, a floppy, no substance ATM. Terrible ways to view men. So, and I just, that's where I come to in terms of the whole like lesbian thing. I went to art college. There's a point that you get to where you're like, oh, that's what that means. No, thank you. For me, that's where
Okay.
I got
Yeah.
that far, right? But that's enough for me. But I don't hate people. I will not hate people. And that is the
Right.
hardest thing, is that I'm constantly called hateful. And I'm just like, probably one of the least hateful people, but I will stand for truth. And the problem, again, coming full circle, Judeo-Christianity, is that in the Bible, it says, if you stand for truth, you will be hated. That's really
That's
where
very
we're
true.
at.
Unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, Spinster Mountain says there is no substance. Pretty much wraps up the whole identitarian approach. It's all about appearances.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then Calm on Ground says a lot of people are seeking a better spot in the intersectional pylon. And that's a point about
Yes.
the
Yes.
adoption of an LGBTQ plus
Yes.
identity. And I know of kids that are boys that identify as girls dating girls that identify as boys. So you essentially have
Yes.
a straight relationship that's dressed up in all the bells and whistles of LGBT, because the worst thing that you want to be is a cishet white guy. And
Yes.
then the next worst thing you want to be is a basic bitch, which means that you're a straight girl. And so, anything,
Bad.
yeah, you want to get as far away from those as you can, because it is having quote unquote privilege is like something that sticks to you that you need to slough off. And you do that by building identities on top of it.
Yes. 100%. Well, it's kind of interesting. I was watching his show. This is so off topic, but I was watching the show about it's a documentary about some guy that was trying to find his brother on Mount Everest. He died on Mount Everest. They never recovered the body. Okay. And it's a documentary on Hulu. And it was, it was interesting, a lot of grief. And I used to work in grief. That was kind of one of my focuses as a mental health professional. And my favorite was time was when I was doing just grief. But you look at the comment in the reviews, and this idea about privilege kept coming up over and over again. Like, we can't take this seriously because this family is privileged and has the financial means to go look and search for the brother. So they absolutely miss the whole entire point, because at the end, they don't find the brother, but they end up finding a very poor family of Sherpas. They end up finding um, the father's body, and so they decide to use their efforts and privilege, but really their financial resources, to bring that guy back to his family. And his family were like, oh my gosh, we could never have been able to do this without you, and all of those points were lost on the fact that this was a white family that had the financial means to go searching for this brother. And that, when I was reading those reviews, that's where I was thinking, I just, this is just where we still are. Have we made any progress or movement in any humanity, pro-humanity direction? Like, we just haven't. You have adults that are sitting there writing all about, using fancy words, by the way. And I'm thinking, you must be very highly educated yourself. And you're pointing the finger at this group, where, the idea was just kind of this journey, which I thought was fascinating. You saw some views of Everest. For some reason, I'm very fascinated by Everest and people that climb Everest. And I'm not a mountain climber. I don't hike even. So, but there's something that's so beautiful about it to me. I don't know. But I was reading, but the comments on privilege were they overshadowed the entire, so it actually got very low reviews. And that was a big reason why.
I'm reminded of when you say that is like, that's how my mom felt when I was growing up. And she grew up in foster care and in a really, really horrible home life, feeling very poor, feeling very left out of things. And that sense of victimhood it made her bitter, and it made her, she changed as she got older. When she was older, she was much softer and gentler, and had a different perspective. But I can remember that kind of toxic envy, that bitterness, that like judgment of other people. And I remember how much it hurt her, because it made her, it was true, but it's kind of like you're using a truth that hurts you to continue to rewound yourself and to keep you away from other people.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
If you really want to go into what I've seen that's been evil, is watching people gloat about what happened during the hurricane.
You're coming in kind of quiet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Watching people gloat about what happened during the hurricane, and especially watching people say that white people deserve it.
Oh, wow. I haven't
was
seen that.
really, really hard. And this is what I would call evil. The people who don't recognize when they've got those children in school that they're starting to become those people. The people who can literally say this was God's reckoning or God's cleansing or whatever.
Oh my God.
When people start to say that, because I was like, well, what makes a teacher fail? A teacher fails when you recognize that and think that that's okay. When you don't do everything you can to stop that chip on your shoulder that is so bad once again, that you're creating bigots, then you have truly, truly failed. And I don't have a whole lot of pity for anybody who can watch that happen. And I watched it. I watched several people and I was like, how come it's not hate speech for them to say this stuff? And
Right.
because it was so ugly and they feel self-righteous in doing it. But what I've said before, you guys, is that they're the guinea pigs. So basically Black society and the attitudes that have been cultivated in them because they got rid of their Judeo-Christian beliefs and now it's just a mask for Marxism. And
Mhm.
Marxism is nihilism and resentment. So we got rid of those things and now we have that. And that's the world we're pushing for. That is the world that we will probably elect in a couple of weeks. That would be my assumption. And there will be more of that. More of that
Mm.
put into schools, put into business, everything that, I mean, look what FEMA did.
Mhm.
If you go to FEMA, it said, we're equity based now. So that I
And
would call
FEMA
that
had not
evil.
put in,
I would,
FEMA's not putting in any money toward,
yeah,
apparently FEMA had not even touched the budget that the last I read was they hadn't even touched the budget that they had been allotted to go and help the victims of those hurricanes. And if
yeah,
it's because it's equity based, then it's because it was mostly in white rural areas, and those
Mhm.
people are
yeah.
not going to be, if it's
No.
equity based, obviously, right?
And if
So,
we
They're
teach
you
not.
that
know,
as a society, I think it's
Well,
probably gone to
that's
we
bad.
start to see the fruits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, that's how
yeah,
deep it is.
yeah.
Well, I guess that's a depressing place to leave it, but we probably better leave it
Right.
there. Well, first, before we go, one thing that gives you hope right now, what's one thing that's positive or gives you hope?
The younger generation, they are
Yeah.
ripe for mentors. And if they have mentors, if they have people in their lives who will tell them the truth, they are going to be so strong.
Mhm.
I think I see a lot of that in my nephews who are, now in college. And aside from the one being encouraged not to vote, which is fine, but in general, I've seen them become so much more open-minded about what's happening and understand that that's not the way that they want to live as men. And that gives me a lot of hope. And it's a huge testament to how my sister and her husband have raised them. And so that gives me a lot of hope that there are people out there who are raising children and young men, young women that are not going to be bigots.
I want to praise good men. Sorry, I know that's the last thing, but I want to praise good men because, you know, Benjamin came into your life and stepped
Yes,
into that role, and that's pretty
Mhm.
awesome.
Mhm.
And
yes,
he takes a lot of flack, not for that, but for other things, right?
yes,
I'm gonna praise my mouse hunting husband because
yes,
because there are so many good everyday men out there who don't get the praise that they deserve.
Mhm.
And Christine, I
and
just don't know how yours do.
I'll praise my husband. He's put up with a lot of health problems that I've had, and definitely things that happened after we got together. So, he didn't sign up for this, but he's been such an amazing man in just being supportive and balancing being strong and balancing being supportive and vulnerable about it as well with me. And so I think, but having that shoulder and knowing that he is a consistent and he's constant. I could be very moody person, but having a
You
constant,
no,
yeah,
Christine.
no way, right? Never,
Mhm.
not me. But yes. And so just having that groundedness has really changed the direction of my life, I think, in a lot of ways, in a good direction, of course.
Yeah, I think if we all would spend less time on social media and more time going back to literature, read long
Yeah.
form, listen to long form discussions, read. Gosh, we used to have. I remember. I think I learned more about psychology from my literature classes than from my psychology classes, from the
Mm-hmm.
reading that I've
Mm-hmm.
done, than from
Mm-hmm.
any of the undergraduate or graduate education I've received on human behavior, because there's so much complexity to one human life. And people are so
Yes.
much more than just men are this way, women are this way, cat ladies, or whatever. We just want to, some people, I mean, there's all this uproar about all these different things, or black people. I mean, my goodness, that it's just insane that we talk about people this way. We are so much more complicated, and we're not good or evil. We're good and evil and everything in between, and all kinds of nuance and complexity. And
Yes.
and I just, yeah, in praise of good men, good women, good people, and people who are just trying to do the best that they can.
Absolutely.
I love talking with y'all. Thanks for
You
joining
too.
me today. And thank
course,
you everybody in
as
the chat.
always.
We'll see you next time.